All right, so Nathan, first of all, talk a little bit about the organization that you run here in the area.
Yeah, so Local Electeds Against Discrimination started a year ago. It's a coalition of local elected officials across the state that are supportive of not only local but also state legislation to protect LGBT people from discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations. That's the larger effort. The effort here locally, one capital region, is individuals from Delhi, Delta, and Meridian townships, supported by their colleagues in Lansing and East Lansing, who are advocating for the adoption of these non-discrimination ordinances that are inclusive in those three townships.
Okay. Now, those three townships, there's actually a fourth township right in the Lansing area, Lansing Township, sort of creates an L around the city. Why aren't they here?
Well, every one of these communities has to work through a process on their own. In these three townships that we had here today, Delta, Delhi, and Meridian, we had very strong leaders in Supervisor Ken Fletcher, Trustee Angela Wilson, and Clerk Evan Hope, all of whom were committed to this and were willing to step forward rather quickly to do it. And so they put us in a position to be able to move these ordinances forward expeditiously. I think obviously the ultimate goal is to have these ordinances across the entire capital region, including Lansing Township, and state legislation in the end analysis. So there's always going to be a different process that we have to work through in different communities. We were in a position to do this today, and in the future, hopefully, we'll set an example for others to follow.
Has Lansing Township had discussions with you all at all about moving this?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly been conversations, and one of the things that I'm very sensitive to, since I'm from East Lansing and not from one of these townships, is trying to be supportive of their internal process of policy making and politics so that they can move forward in a way that's going to work for their community. We're certainly not trying to come in and impose anything on anyone. It's more of a supportive role. So, I'll continue to make myself available. I know these other local electeds will make themselves available to act in that supporting role as Lansing Township moves through that conversation on their own timeline and through their own process.
Okay. Now, Royal Oak is traditionally seen as a liberal bastion and whatnot, and they're facing a repeal of their ordinance, which was just passed. Holt in Delhi Township area and Delta Township tend to be pretty conservative, generally Republican. Are we going to face ballot initiatives if these get passed in those communities?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about the fact that all three of these are charter townships is, unlike a city like Royal Oak, where the right of referendum is provided by their charter, these charter townships are all governed by a state law, the Charter Township Act, that provides a very limited right of referendum. And so these ordinances, if adopted, would not be subject to a local referendum. Having said that, I think the real issue is, how does the community feel about them? Would there be a desire to do that even if it weren't legally possible? And I think the reality is that there wouldn't be in these communities. There's this increasing trend towards recognition that these ordinances are the right thing to do, that the economically smart thing to do. You've seen a ton of momentum in that area. And if you look to the most recent election in these townships, you saw these voters electing progressive officials who have made it very clear that they stand for this kind of legislation. So we'll see what happens, but I anticipate that in all three of these townships we've talked about today, Meridian, Delhi, and Delta, that their constituents will rally behind local elected officials who have chosen to lead on this very important issue.
Okay. Anything that I didn't ask you that you want to add or talk about?
No, I think the only other component of what we're talking about today, because LEAD is not just about local ordinances, but it's about state legislation, is we're doing this because it provides substantive protection in these local communities. In this case, about 100,000 additional people would be protected, but in a state the size of Michigan, that leaves a lot of folks unprotected. And so it's not a coincidence that this event is being held at the state capitol, because we want to send a very strong message to the legislature that the time for inaction has passed. It's time to act on Elliott Larson. It's time to have Michigan join the 21 other states that already have banned discrimination based on sexual orientation, the 16 that have banned discrimination based on gender identity, and for these folks to follow the lead of their own people. In 23 communities across the state who have done that. In East Lansing, our ordinance is now 41 years old. I wasn't even alive when we adopted our ordinance. I think that says a lot about the desirability of these policies, the workability of these policies, and it's time for the state legislature to get their act together and act on Elliott Larson.
Okay, thanks.